Tony Stark, everyone's favorite genius, billionaire, playboy, well, you know the rest. After being chosen to spearhead Marvel's preeminent on-screen cinematic universe, it's safe to say old Chrome Dome is now one of the most recognizable characters on the face of the planet. And while Tony Stark's metal-plated persona was famously a founding member of the Avengers and has saved the world countless times over the years, the hero's reputation is anything but spotless. Iron Man's long history is fraught with missteps and dubious decisions, with consequences ranging from broken friendships all the way to broken worlds. Today here at Plot Armor Comics, we're going to be taking a trip down digital memory lane and count down the top or bottom 10 worst things Iron Man has ever done. Number 10. Weapons manufacturing. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? This might seem like a rather large transgression to be weighing in at number 10, but trust me, building an arsenal of weapons for the government isn't nearly the worst entry on Tony Stark's resume. This first item likely won't surprise many of you Iron Man fans out there, as it's practically Tony's origin story. A young man with a demanding family legacy and a company to uphold, 19-year-old genius Anthony Stark begins developing high-tech weapons for an increasingly covetous United States military. Tony builds the government everything from landmines to nuclear missile systems for explicit use in wars abroad. During one high-profile interview, the ugly truths of Tony's past are bluntly laid out for him. Your arms work of the 90s still haunts the poverty and war-stricken countries they're deployed in. On a list of any other hero's lowest moments, a war profiteering past would likely rank among the very worst of the worst. Tony's past in the arms business, however, represents his character's original sin, the crucible of wrongdoing upon which Iron Man's entire ethos is forged. In Iron Man 232, one of the best Iron Man issues ever written, Tony wrestles with the scores of victims his inventions have wrought in the depths of his nightmares. You can't handle no monsters till you handle yourself. A hulking empty suit of armor jeers at Tony, and eventually the iron-plated Avenger comes to understand that I'm the devil, stealing my own soul. Tony's past developing weapons is as central to Iron Man as the death of Martha and Thomas Wayne are to Batman. The massive moral failure this section of Tony's life represents will forever color his motives, his decisions, and his personality. This tattered origin will shed considerable light on the intentions behind Tony's actions as we proceed further down the list. While the carnage wrought by Stark Enterprises technologies will always weigh heavy on Tony's conscience, Iron Man itself was born from Tony swearing off his destructive past and vowing never again to bring death and war to the planet, which, as we'll see, doesn't exactly go to plan. But before we get into any more of Tony's troubles, be sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications on to never miss an upload, and Hulk smash that like button as it really helps the channel. Now, on to number 9. Number 9. Throwing the first punch. The classic Iron Man arc Armor Wars contains many questionable moments from the man in the iron suit, from going rogue and attacking government facilities and guards to tracking down and electrocuting Stingray based on entirely false assumptions. But one action stands above all as the worst and most consequential taken during the Armor Wars conflict. During that arc, Tony realizes his Iron Man tech has been swiped and used to build various suits across the globe. Agonized over the idea of his tech being misused, Tony despairs, How many have drawn blood with my sword? Swearing to rid the world of his designs once and for all, Tony sets out to stop all possible wielders of his unserved tech, no matter what it takes. During one of those missions in which Tony infiltrates a government super prison codenamed the Vault, Iron Man and James Rhodey plan to take out the prison's mecha wardens, who use suits infused with Stark tech to keep the prisoners under lock and key. These wardens, known as the Guardsmen, aren't evil per se, simply men and women working as guards at an upscale prison site, but Stark's fury at his misused technology knows no bounds. Rhodey impersonates the villain Electro to gain entry into the site, shutting down the external defenses once inside to allow Iron Man entry. But following stealthily behind Iron Man is one seeking to stop his assault on a United States compound, one of Tony's most trusted friends, Steve Rogers. Earlier, when staking out the Vault to plan an assault on the Guardsmen, Steve, who had the title of Captain America stripped from him by the government and goes simply by the Captain, approached Tony and pleaded with him not to go through with his plan. Steve tries to reason with Tony. I'm asking you as a friend, Tony. Don't do this. So when Tony disregards the Captain's polite invitation not to commit a felony, the Captain is right on his tail, ready to put an end to Tony's personal quest. Rhodey and Stark's plan to take out the Guardsmen was simple. Pump a gas used for incapacitation throughout the Vault and wait for the Guardsmen armor's 30-minute air supply to deplete. Then disable their Stark tech without any confrontation. Of course, things don't go exactly to plan, but through Rhodey's ingenuity and Iron Man's raw power, the two are able to disable all but one suit of armor before the captain jumps between Iron Man and the final guardsman. Iron Man warns Steve, "I can't let that armor survive or be replicated. If I have to go through you to get to it, I will." But before the two can brawl it out, the guardsman behind the Star-Spangled Senior Citizen refuses to take off his helmet even as his air supply depletes, knowing the gas will immobilize him should he breathe without his armor. To save the foolhardy guard, the captain leaps into action and rips his helmet off, saving his life. But while his back is turned, Tony hits Steve with a devastating taser from his gauntlet, sucker punching one of his oldest friends and doing irreconcilable damage to their relationship. Some of you out there may be thinking, big whoop, plot armor. Cap and Iron Man argue all the time. This doesn't even seem like that big of a fight. Well, it's certainly no secret that Captain America and Iron Man don't always get along, and soon we'll get to see the apex of that particular feud. But this moment, deep within the halls of the massive super prison, the very first stake was driven between Tony and Steve's friendship. All future disagreements and fights between these two titans were born here, as Iron Man stoops as low as to sucker punch Captain America while the first Avenger tries to save a civilian's life. And as Tony walks away from his friend's paralyzed body, Iron Man meets Cap's eyes for just a moment, and in that moment, both men know that a bond had been broken today, a bond as old as their friendship, that may never be whole again. The ramifications of this moment cannot be understated. The invincible Iron Man striking down Captain America in a moment of vulnerability represents the very first rupture in a friendship that, as we'll soon see, the entire world hinges upon. Number 8. Bye Bye Hulk. This one will be the first entry on our tour through Tony's worst moments to deal with the Marvel supergroup the Illuminati, but oh boy, it certainly won't be the last. The group is dedicated to solving the existential threats that no one else can handle, and making the choices that no one else has the stomach to make. Unsurprisingly, this leads the Illuminati to some pretty difficult decisions, and not to spoil anything, but those decisions are now showing up in a top 10 worst moments list, so safe to say they weren't all winners. And to top it all off, they have a super chill name. The members of the group stay pretty consistent across its history, but occasionally members do leave or join the Illuminati, most notably founder and longtime member Charles Xavier and Black Panther, who warns the rest of the group of the dangers the Illuminati pose to the Earth during their first meeting and refuses to join. For this particular event, the roster consists of Doctor Strange, Black Bolt, Reed Richards, Namor the Submariner, and of course the man of the hour, Tony Stark. So anyway, this boys' club of geniuses decides once and for all that the Hulk needs to be dealt with in a permanent fashion. Dr. Bruce Banner has a long and storied history of rampaging across Midwestern America as a giant unstoppable green menace. And after once again flattening San Francisco, Tony Stark calls together the Illuminati to discuss a solution he believes to be both ethical and permanent. Tony suggests shooting the Hulk deep into space to a distant planet where he cannot hurt any conscious life forms but can live out his natural life in peace. The Illuminati agrees to Stark's plan with the noted dissent of Namor, who shouts, "Banner will come back from whence you sent him, and he will kill you all, and he'll be right." Of course, Namor's prophecy eventually comes true. To give a brief summary, Hulk is banished to the edges of space, where he's enslaved as a gladiator on the brutal planet of Sakaar. The Hulk leads a rebellion on the planet, eventually being crowned king and marrying a queen for whom he has a deep love. One solemn day, Hulk's original vessel of the Illuminati design explodes, killing his beloved queen and reigniting in the Green Goliath a burning hot hatred of humans. Returning to Earth, the events of World War Hulk take place, which sees the entire planet taken under the Hulk's rule for a time, turned into a twisted version of his imprisoned home of Sakaar. And thus, the 8th worst decision of Tony Stark's life directly leads to the global domination at the hands of the Incredible Hulk. How about that for a tough week? And we haven't even broken the top 5 yet, folks, but don't worry, number 7 is where things really start heating up. Number 7. When one Phoenix just isn't enough. For our next low light of Iron Man's career, we come to one of my personal favorites. This one takes place right smack dab in the middle of a conflict with the X-Men that ended up having once again global repercussions. Say what you will about Tony's decision making, he certainly manages to make big ones. This doozy of a call comes to us from the pages of Avengers vs. X-Men, and while the other decisions in this list so far might have some basis in rationality, this one, I assure you, does not. Hope Summers, the child of Scott Summers and Jean Grey, is commonly referred to as the Mutant Messiah. She, like her mother, was foretold to be visited upon by a cosmic entity, an all-powerful emissary of death and rebirth itself that had once possessed and killed her mother in the pages of X-Men books long past, the dreaded Phoenix Force. This conflict occurs during a particularly difficult time for mutantdom, as the Scarlet Witch had recently reduced the Earth's mutant population to a fraction of its former strength by using her powers to expunge nearly every mutant genome on Earth from existence. As a result of the near extinction of the mutant race, Hope was sheltered away on a small island community of remaining mutants named Utopia. Hope was trained rigorously by the X-Men, and particularly her father Cyclops, so that she would be ready to wield the mighty Phoenix Force when it arrived. This would hopefully bring about the rebirth of the mutant population of the planet. Enter the Avengers. Iron Man and Captain America receive notifications from deep space that the Phoenix Force is on its way towards Earth, and fast. Predictably, the Avengers freak out. The Phoenix Force is a godlike entity capable of destroying the entire planet in the blink of an eye. This is the exact type of global threat the Avengers were formed to prevent from ever reaching the Earth. Iron Man devises a plan as the rest of the Avengers struggle to gain custody of Hope from the X-Men. When the Phoenix Force approaches during a colossal battle on the face of the moon between the Avengers forces and the X-Men, Tony drives a cosmic disruptor directly into the massive visage of the Phoenix, a device he describes as a Phoenix Killer. This is precisely why this decision ranks above some of the others we've seen. The mere idea of killing a being of pure cosmic energy is plain and simply an act of egotistic hubris from Tony, a character flaw that he succumbs to often, usually with dizzying results, and this was no exception. Tony flies his machine into the Phoenix, but of course does not kill the entity. Tony manages only to split the Phoenix into 5 equal but terrifying parts. The shards of the Phoenix desperately latch onto the hosts closest to the being when it was attacked, and the X-Men's Cyclops, Emma Frost, Namor, Colossus, and Magik are all imbued with the powers and eventually the hunger of the great and terrible Phoenix Force. You know what they say, 5 Phoenix are better than 1. During the Phoenix incursion, we see how Tony reacts during an attack on Earth, but what happens when Tony is the attacker? Number 6. Single-handedly declaring war. The second Marvel Civil War, which saw a moral split between the sympathizers of Captain Marvel and Iron Man, he always seems to get mixed up in these things, doesn't he? Is hotly debated. In my personal opinion, Iron Man's reputation comes out better after this event than it does after the disastrous consequences of the first Civil War. However, as mentioned, this is an open debate, and many see Civil War II to be an even more egregious example of terrible decision-making from the Avengers' resident rust bucket. There is no question that Tony makes some errors in judgment during this extended skirmish with Carol Danvers, though, and as a result, the actions during Civil War II will land solidly towards the middle of our list. The story starts off when Ulysses, a young Inhuman with the perceived ability to read the future, begins having visions of Earth-nullifying effects. Using these visions, Carol Danvers believes she and her task force could divert future catastrophes before they even come to fruition. She uses one such vision to preempt an attempt by Thanos to once again collect the Infinity Stones. On the mission, She-Hulk is put into a coma, and Iron Man's best friend James Rhodey, aka War Machine, is killed by Thanos himself. Distraught, Iron Man tearfully confronts Captain Marvel and lays the death of War Machine at her feet, swearing he would make sure none of you ever play God again. This declaration is not made lightly as Iron Man shoots off to apprehend the Inhuman whose vision led to this disastrous event. The only problem? Ulysses is an Inhuman, and as such, he lives within the walls of the fortress of New Attilan. The floating Inhuman capital city houses an entire nation of superpowered individuals, and each and every citizen is protected by the whole of the human Inforces. This, of course, doesn't slow Tony down for a second. He barrels into New Attilan, takes down the Inhuman queen Medusa in a heated exchange, and makes off with his prisoner. All of this, of course, was born from deep emotional stress on Tony's part. He had just seen his best friend's dead body after all. But politics care little for emotions, and as Tony flies off with Ulysses in tow, Medusa speaks to the seriousness of this act, saying, "Doesn't matter what he thinks he's doing. He just declared war on the Inhumans." Much like Tony's small skirmish with Captain America at the Vault during Armor Wars, this is yet another example of a small action taken during a moment of heavy emotion that cascades outward into huge ramifications. Tony's abduction of Ulysses is the induction point for the entire series of events of Civil War II, which have immense consequences for every hero involved, not to mention at least a few deaths of notable heroes including Dr. Bruce Banner and none other than Tony Stark himself. Well, permanently comatose. And if you think nothing could be worse than causing your own death, surely this must be Tony Stark's worst decision of them all, right? Well, you must not know Tony Stark, because it gets much more sinister than this before the end. Trust me. We haven't even gotten to the Stark Industries mobile app yet, and that's where things really get dark. Number 5. Supporting superhero registration. This is a big one, folks. Another career-defining moment for everyone's favorite chrome-plated high flyer. Due to how integral the story arc has become to the Marvel Universe, it's likely that Tony will never live down the choices he made during the first Marvel Civil War. In this now classic event, the ranks of the superhuman community are split down the middle over a new law that would require every superpowered individual, from masked vigilantes to mutants, to register their powers and identity with the government, thereby being subject to never-before-seen levels of government regulation and control. Captain America and his group of dissenters were driven underground during the conflict as S.H.I.E.L.D. brutally attempted to capture and imprison any superhero working outside of their purview. Tony Stark not only supported the bill during this time, he spearheaded the controversial legislation to be enacted into law, and he had an active hand in helping the government locate and capture his friends. The rift between Tony Stark and Steve Rogers that all started with an electrocution at the vault has never been more disparate than during these events. Tony made a lot of missteps during the first Civil War, including screw-ups so impressively cold-hearted that they've earned higher placements on this very list. Trust me, there are some world-ending consequences waiting for us further down. But there are a few cardinal sins Tony makes specifically regarding the Superhero Registration Act that show us exactly why even supporting the bill has earned its own place in our countdown. Tony explains the law as anyone with powers, anyone in a costume, any mutant is going to be required by law to reveal themselves to the United States government, and that refusing to do so will be considered a federal crime. The first reason the decision to back this legislation is one of Iron Man's worst moments is that it goes against the ideals at his very core. Iron Man was born out of Tony's belief that no governing body was responsible enough to have access to his weapons technology. While Tony is very much an establishment kind of guy, he saw, albeit after some years of denial, the havoc and destruction his designs were being used for in the hands of the government, and promptly decided to never again let his technology fall into the wrong hands. Expecting his friends and teammates to happily sign over their services, their privacy, and their lives to the man is already one huge and frankly insulting blunder. But to trust the government to handle that authority responsibly, that's something Tony Stark knew better than to do. And big surprise, the government proves that they can't be trusted with the power Tony happily handed them. No sooner is the law enacted that S.H.I.E.L.D. begins implanting electrocution devices into supervillains in an attempt to assist the apprehension of rogue superheroes, which Tony gives his express approval for. Well done, Chrome Dome. Tony's second superhero registration misstep that earns it a spot on this list is convincing Spider-Man to unmask publicly. As a part of a publicity stunt to garner support for his already controversial law, Tony convinces Peter Parker to publicly unveil his secret identity to the world. This was one of the defining moments of the Civil War event, and it proved to be one of Iron Man's most selfish ones. Uprooting Peter Parker's life by enlisting his assistance in what was ultimately a marketing tool took advantage of Peter's trust and friendship. When later decisions of Tony's, with higher rankings on this list, drive Spider-Man to quit the Avengers and join Captain America's underground rebellion, Tony even tries to hold Peter Parker hostage with the decision. You really think you can go back to your old life now that everyone knows who you are? What about May? What about Mary Jane? After which Peter proceeds to punch Tony through a wall, which I think we can all agree he deserved. Up next, the worst thing Tony has ever done on purpose. Number 4, Extremis 3.0. Many entries on this list involve good intentions with unforeseen consequences. For most of these worst moments, Stark's actions had at least a sliver of noble intention behind them. This next item on our countdown is not one of those. Number 4 on our list might not have the universe-shaking consequences that we'll see from higher-ranked moments, but its self-containment should not hamper the horrendous actions taken by Iron Man during this arc. This dastardly decision involves none other than a little app called Extremis 3.0. Free to use, publicly available, and released locally in San Francisco by Stark Technologies, on the surface this app was designed to imbue the user with perfect physical characteristics. However, unbeknownst to the public, Extremis 3.0 was a techno-virus designed to transform you into the very best you can be. By releasing the app for free all across San Fran, Tony single-handedly turned the city into a giant orgy of drunkenness, irresponsibility, and excess. But his ultimate plan was even more abhorrent. After releasing the app giving millions of people access to a sort of surface-level perfection, Tony raises the price of access to $99 a day. And Tony understood perfectly the ramifications of this business move, saying, "I'll let them all feel perfection." Do you have any idea what they'll do to get that back? This entry on our worst of list marks the closest we've come so far to Tony exhibiting true evil. And I know what you may be thinking, but the moral rot that Tony exhibited during the release of Extremis 3.0 was not the result of some demonic possession or hologrammed version of himself being controlled by a puppeteering villain. These actions were taken by none other than Tony himself. Granted, after facing off with the Avengers against a psychically enhanced Red Skull, Tony found his mind altered, and many of the worst qualities of his personality dialed up to 11. This led Tony's already inflated ego to believe himself superior to the general populace. While Tony's launch and misuse of Extremis to control and manipulate a vulnerable population under the effects of a psychic event, there can be no denying that somewhere deep down Tony always possessed the capacity to pull a stunt like this. Extremis 3.0 was born of Tony Stark's mind and his alone. Truly, the blame can fall on no one else's shoulders but his own. As we've seen time and time again from this countdown, Iron Man's code of ethics proves far more brittle than his armor. And if you aren't convinced yet, our next entry is one of Iron Man's lowest points and involves the death of a dear friend. Number 3. Cloning Thor. Another heavy-hitting moment coming to us from the pages of Civil War that proves 2006 was a bad time to be Tony Stark. Civil War truly brought out the worst in Tony, and as we descend down the list into worse and worser decisions, we'll start to see why Iron Man's reputation isn't nearly as well polished as his armor. Our third worst thing Iron Man has ever done is when he cloned his longtime teammate and dear friend, Thor Odinson. Tony was worried he would lose the war against Captain America. The pro-registration movement was formidable to be sure, and Tony even had the entire S.H.I.E.L.D. armada supporting him, but he decided he needed even more firepower. That's when Tony, Reed Richards, and Hank Pym began attempting to clone Thor using a single strand of hair Tony had held onto since the very first Avengers meeting. The clone Thunder God came to Iron Man's aid during a sting operation meant to crush Captain America's resistance once and for all. On the battlefield, Captain America's forces were being overrun. Iron Man himself was beating Cap to a pulp, and the first Avenger seemed no match for Iron Man's cold and calculated onslaught. The rain-soaked battlefield was pitting friend against friend, teammate against teammate. That is until Tony's pseudo-Thor arrived. A being with the power levels and mannerisms of Thor, but with a coldness behind his eyes that the true God of Thunder never possessed. Cap's anti-registration forces began attempting to retreat, and the gargantuan hero Goliath stepped up to hold clone Thor back until his team could escape. However, in one devastating lightning bolt from a Stark-designed Mjolnir, the clone of Thor blasted a hole right through Goliath's chest, killing him instantly. Both sides of the battlefield looked on in horror as their friend was murdered outright by a creature of Tony Stark's design. The giant hero may not have been felled by Tony's hands personally, but make no mistake. Much like all of those years spent manufacturing weapons, it was Tony Stark's handiwork that struck the killing blow. Tony, along with some other super geniuses, was directly responsible for not only violating Thor's trust and friendship by cloning him, but for the death of the hero Goliath, who was simply standing up for what he believed in. Perhaps there is no other moment that puts in clearer terms the fact that Tony Stark is most certainly unworthy of the power of Thor. Number 2. Project 42. We're in the final stretch now, folks. While most of these transgressions might seem pretty unforgivable, I promise we've saved the worst for last. But first, we have to talk about the travesty that was Project 42. Once again, we find ourselves looking at decisions made during the thick of Marvel's first Civil War between Steve and Tony. As we know, refusing to register as a superhuman or vigilante was a federal crime under the Registration Act, and Tony Stark's side was using everything from supervillains to S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarriers to track down unregistered heroes. But where do you keep superheroes that have broken your laws? Once you've justified throwing a hero in prison, where on earth does there exist a prison capable of holding such remarkable and powerful individuals? This was the problem Tony Stark set out to solve. Project 42 was a massive prison that Tony Stark personally helped fund and build. It was designed as a holding area for superhumans who broke the new laws surrounding registration. The catch? It was located in the negative zone, only accessible by portals that led from existing prisons to the super prison, and can be cut off from the world to prevent prison breaks. To reiterate, Tony Stark built a fortress in the negative zone to keep his friends and colleagues imprisoned while they awaited trial for crimes he personally helped sign into law. Civil War brought out the worst in Tony. His blind devotion to superhero registration made him more dogmatic and egotistical than ever, to the point where he couldn't even see the horror behind the actions he was committing. If there was ever a moment that perfectly encapsulated all that was wrong with Tony's decision-making during the Civil War era, it's the construction of a super prison with the express purpose of incarcerating his friends and teammates. When Daredevil is finally captured by the task force designed to take down rogue vigilantes, Tony personally escorts him into the prison. Daredevil is cold and silent as Tony begs him to reconsider his stance, saying nobody wants to put you in jail, even as Tony is actively imprisoning Daredevil. There is a concerning disconnect between Tony's intentions and his actions during the Civil War era, which culminate in the infamous creation of what would come to be called Project 42. Number 1. Destroying a world. Here we are, the worst thing that Iron Man has ever done. This moment comes to us from another adventure of the Illuminati. This time, the group consisted of Black Panther, Reed Richards, Namor, Black Bolt, Doctor Strange, Bruce Banner, and Tony Stark. Their mission? To stop the destruction of the Earth from another dimension's planet smashing into their own. The only problem was that there was no solution presented itself. Captain America, during his brief stint as a member, attempted and failed to use the Infinity Gauntlet to push back the approaching planet to no avail. After the captain's failure, the rest of the members agreed that the only way to protect their world was to destroy the approaching one. Steve Rogers, as expected, vehemently disagrees with the rest of the secret society. And on Iron Man's order, Doctor Strange wipes Captain America's memory of the Illuminati or their mission completely. It's telling that mind-wiping one of his best friends is not even the reason this moment tops the list of Iron Man's worst. And so, after exhausting every other option, the day finally arrived. The Illuminati traveled to the world that was fated to collide with their own, and they brought with them a world-ending bomb of Iron Man's own design to prevent one catastrophe by causing another. All parties agreed that they were about to commit the most atrocious act they could imagine, with Black Panther saying, "I know I must, but the horror of it, the inhumanity, murdering all of those people, killing a world, it's wrong." And when it came down to it, when the time came to activate the device, Tony admits, "Well, don't look at me. I helped build the thing. I'm not using it either." Indeed, none of the Illuminati could bring themselves to activate the world-ending bomb. None, that is, except Namor. It is true that Namor alone pulled the trigger that ended a world, but it's equally important to remember that the bomb itself, the bomb designed for the express purpose of destroying an entire world and everyone in it, was built by none other than the famous Tony Stark, the invincible Iron Man, destroyer of worlds. Well, that's our countdown of Tony Stark's 10 worst moments. Leave us a comment if there's a Tony Stark moment you think should have made the list. Thanks so much for watching, and we hope you learned a thing or two about the rustiest Avenger. I'm Morse Code, and have a great rest of your day.